Caitlin Clark argue with Stephanie White. Caitlin trying to communicate with the team. Look at her. Now Stephanie White's talking to Caitlin. And Caitlin Clark just said like this. Stephanie, what are you talking? She's like, Caitlin just... And then look at Stephanie White and her having a dispute. Another dispute on camera. Going to Stephanie White, trying to hear her out. And Caitlin's trying to explain to Stephanie White. Stephanie White with a rebuttal. I'm talking about right here. Right here. Stephanie White, how about you go right there? How about you go right there, please? I'm tired of the back and forth. Every time Caitlin says A, you say B. How about you? Yeah, Caitlin, let's try A. For God's sake, I've never seen you agree with Caitlin Clark on camera. My girl?
What's going on, basketball world? You've all seen that leaked sideline clip now, and let's be real. This isn't your typical coach-player back and forth in the middle of a heated game. This doesn't look like normal competitive frustration. What that footage shows feels way heavier than that. It's a raw, emotional flashpoint, and the internet is treating it like a sign that something deeper might be going on inside the Indiana Fever setup right now. Clips like this don't just trend for no reason. New unedited footage has surfaced showing Caitlin Clark visibly frustrated on the sideline, throwing her hands up and reacting strongly toward what's unfolding around her. And almost instantly, the speculation machine kicked into overdrive. Some reports and online chatter are already suggesting that head coach Stephanie White may not be pleased with that kind of visible pushback, with talk of internal discipline or benching floating around social spaces. Whether that's fact or noise, one thing is clear: the calm narrative around this team has taken a serious hit. Meanwhile, Stephanie White's recent media appearance only added more fuel to the fire for people paying attention. When asked directly about the team's defensive performance and an injury update on KK, she kept things extremely guarded, offering no real specifics and defaulting to broad coaching language about effort, growth, and getting 1% better every day. Standard coach speak on the surface, but in the current climate, even the most routine answers are being dissected like they carry hidden meaning. And that's where the tension really builds, because this same stretch of games has already had fans questioning how individual performances are being framed and whether standout moments, like Caitlin Clark's explosive fourth quarter run against Washington, are being fully acknowledged in the way people expect. Now, with emotions running high and every sideline reaction under a microscope, the conversation around control, communication, and chemistry inside this Fever team is only getting louder. If you rewind that game for a second, Caitlin Clark was basically the only reason Indiana even had a pulse late in that stretch. She went on that insane scoring burst, 5 deep, heavily contested threes, some of them straight from the logo, dragging the Fever back into the fight almost by herself. But when Stephanie White later stepped up to the podium, the framing shifted almost immediately into something far more diluted. Not a star takeover, not a historic run, just team effort and collective execution. And that's where a pattern starts to stand out for a lot of people watching closely. When other veteran players have solid nights, efficient scoring, or key defensive stretches, the praise tends to be loud, direct, and personal. Words like leadership, toughness, and carrying the group get thrown around freely. But when Caitlin Clark puts together one of those explosive offensive showcases that completely bends the game, the language suddenly becomes more generalized. It turns into system talk, spacing talk, 5 players connected on a string, and incremental improvement messaging. To critics, it starts to look like a consistent double standard in how individual impact is recognized inside this system. Now, my view on this is pretty straightforward. Stephanie White arrived in Indiana with her own established identity and coaching philosophy already in place, and there's a belief among some observers that she isn't exactly thrilled that Caitlin Clark's star power, both culturally and on the court, overshadows everything else in the building. From that perspective, this isn't just about building a modern offense around a generational talent. It's about trying to fit that talent into a structure that was never really designed for her style in the first place. That's also why earlier comments about rotations and substitutions have drawn so much attention. In a previous breakdown, I pointed to moments where Clark was pulled during high momentum stretches, right when she looked fully locked in, and how that sparked debate about whether she was being managed normally or interrupted at key points in her rhythm. Some fans dismissed that entirely as standard load management or rotation strategy. Others saw it very differently, and honestly, when you zoom out and look at the broader pattern, substitution timing, offensive flow breaking up during hot streaks, and the offense devolving into isolation-heavy possessions when she's off the floor, it's easy to see why the conversation gets heated. Whether you call it strategy or mismanagement, the result is the same. The rhythm of your most dynamic offensive engine keeps getting disrupted. Take the matchup against Seattle as another example. Yes, there were improvements on the defensive end at times, and the team finished with solid rebounding numbers, including 38 boards, which looks respectable in a box score, but context matters. Seattle isn't exactly operating at full strength this season, and simply handling a struggling opponent at home doesn't automatically validate the offensive structure or rotation decisions being used. After the game, the media didn't really let the conversation slide. One reporter directly questioned Stephanie White about potential lineup changes, including inserting Lexi Hull into the starting group, and also highlighted how frequently rotations have shifted from game to game this season. That question basically put the inconsistency front and center. Her response leaned into familiarity and patience, acknowledging the team is still early in the season, still experimenting, still trying to figure out which combinations actually produce consistent results. She pointed out that the roster has players who can score and others who can defend, but admitted that sustained four-quarter consistency is still missing. And that, more than anything, is where the real concern sits. Not just individual moments, but a system that still feels like it's searching for stability while trying to maximize a player like Caitlin Clark in real time. She kept circling back to the same explanation, that everything takes time, not just a little adjustment period either. She framed it like a long, drawn-out process, almost as if she was building a cushion of excuses in advance for when results don't match expectations later in the season. And when she was pressed on the decision to start Lexi Hull, the reasoning didn't really land for many observers. The explanation boiled down to wanting a different defensive look and suggesting the bench group needed more spacing and shot creation, which led to Sophie Cunningham being shifted into a reserve role. On paper, it sounded like strategy. In reality, to critics, it came off as disjointed and internally inconsistent, because that's where the frustration builds. You've got Caitlin Clark, one of the most dangerous deep-range shooters and playmaking engines in basketball, but instead of fully designing a system that maximizes her pace, spacing, and gravity, the rotations and combinations keep changing game to game. From that perspective, it starts to look less like a clear identity and more like experimentation that disrupts chemistry instead of building it. Then the entire conversation took a sharp turn. Midway through the media cycle, breaking clips started circulating online that completely shifted the tone of the discussion. Fans under the Fire Stephanie White wave began sharing what they claimed was leaked sideline footage, and it spread rapidly across social media with captions calling for immediate organizational change. The video, according to those sharing it, showed tension behind the scenes tied directly to how Caitlin Clark was being instructed to run the offense in the first half. And when you look at the numbers from that stretch, it adds another layer to the debate. In the first half, when Clark was playing at full speed, pushing tempo, reading gaps instinctively, and attacking freely, the Fever reportedly sat at a strong +11. In the second half, when the pace slowed and structure tightened under heavier coaching direction, that advantage disappeared and the game leveled out. The leaked clip itself shows Clark visibly frustrated during a timeout, locking in on the coaching staff and clearly pushing back instead of quietly accepting direction. Whether you interpret it as emotional competitiveness or something more serious, the moment struck a nerve online. To supporters of Clark's natural style, it looked like a player at odds with a system that was restricting her rhythm and forcing her into a slower, more rigid offensive structure. That's where the debate exploded. Some fans immediately panicked at the idea of the footage going public, arguing it could be spun in a way that paints Clark as difficult to coach or overly emotional. Others pushed back hard, saying suppressing that kind of moment would be dishonest, and that it actually reflects a deeper truth about a system-player mismatch rather than a personality issue. From that angle, the argument is simple. Caitlin Clark is a high IQ, high-skill offensive engine built on pace, vision, and deep shooting range. When she sees the floor clearly, she dictates games at an elite level, so when she voices frustration, supporters argue it isn't rebellion, it's reaction to what she believes is limiting basketball. Online discourse quickly split the fan base. Some posts went viral claiming that you can't simultaneously support the current coaching approach and fully support Clark's development, while others insisted the entire situation is being exaggerated and misread through emotional fan reactions. At the same time, another layer of criticism emerged around Stephanie White's motivations, with some analysts suggesting her connection to the franchise's history may be influencing how she approaches the job today, rather than building fully around the present roster's generational centerpiece. Whether fair or not, that narrative has taken hold in certain corners of the discussion. A. Clash between legacy thinking and modern pace and space basketball, with Caitlin Clark right in the middle of it. And when you strip everything else away, that's what this debate has become about for many observers: philosophy versus talent, structure versus freedom, and whether the System is amplifying a superstar or trying to reshape her into something else entirely? Think about how wild that really is, basketball world. You've got a player in Caitlin Clark whose entire game has already reshaped how women's basketball is played at the highest level. She turned high pick and roll actions from way beyond the arc into a weapon stretching defenses 30 to 40 feet out, forcing constant help and unlocking lanes for cutters and rollers that simply didn't exist before. At that volume, that style didn't just work, it changed the business. It filled arenas, shattered viewership records, and turned Indiana into one of the most talked about franchises in the sport almost overnight. But the tension comes in what happens next. From the outside looking in, it feels like there's an ongoing push to slot her into a slower, more controlled half-court system, more side-to-side passing, more deliberate possessions, more clock management, and less of that free-flowing early shot clock. Chaos where she's at her most dangerous. It's a style built on structure and patience, but it doesn't always align with the pace and instincts that made her a generational force in the first place. And when she does what she naturally does, push tempo in transition, pull up early in the clock from deep, or attempt those high-risk, high-reward passes that break defenses wide open. The broadcast cameras often catch a familiar reaction on the sideline. Arms folded, head shake, a visible moment of disagreement with the decision-making in real time. To critics, that contrast starts to tell a story on its own, a battle between instinct and system, between a player's natural tempo and a coaching framework trying to slow everything down and control it. It's like buying a sports car built for speed and open road performance, then insisting it only be driven in first gear through city traffic. That's why the post-game media moments have also become part of the larger conversation. In one press conference, a reporter tried to steer things toward Caitlin Clark's individual impact, noting that the game in question looked like one of her most complete performances since returning efficient shot volume, only a couple of threes attempted and made, and still leading the team in multiple advanced categories. The question was simple: what part of her game looks closest to being fully back? Stephanie White's answer, however, stayed almost entirely in the physical lane. Instead of highlighting her vision, processing speed, or command of the offense, she focused on one thing: burst. She repeated it several times, emphasizing her burst in transition, her burst on drives, and even suggesting you can see that same burst reflected in her jump shot elevation. She also mentioned strength, explosiveness, and movement patterns, framing her return primarily through athletic indicators. On the surface, that sounds like standard coach speak praise. A casual viewer would hear it and move on without much thought. But to those reading deeper into these media exchanges, the framing stands out. Because when you only describe a player like Caitlin Clark through physical traits, burst, speed, lift, you leave out the part that defines her most: the processing, the creativity, the control of the entire floor with minimal effort. And that omission, intentional or not, changes how the performance is publicly understood. That's where the interpretation splits. Some see routine coaching language, others see a pattern where the intellectual side of her dominance keeps getting downplayed in favor of purely athletic descriptions. She continues to ignore the parts of Caitlin Clark's game that actually define her as a generational talent: the elite processing speed, the court vision, the ability to read defensive rotations in real time, and the sheer control she exerts over the flow of a game. Instead, the conversation gets reduced to something far more shallow, as if she's just another athlete running fast in a straight line, rather than a basketball savant, orchestrating possessions at an entirely different level. And what makes it more noticeable is that it's not happening behind closed doors. It's out in the open, in press conferences and public statements, where the tone stays carefully controlled and almost mechanical. The media session wrapped with an international reporter asking about Indiana's preparation for their upcoming matchup against the expansion team But what stood out more than the words themselves was what wasn't there. There was no excitement, no anticipation, no mention of maximizing tempo, pushing transition opportunities, or using a matchup like this to unlock Caitlin Clark's offensive creativity against a new defense still trying to find its identity. Nothing about pace, entertainment value, or the kind of high-energy basketball that has made this team one of the most watched in the league. Instead, it was flat, procedural, and almost corporate in tone, like a system focused more on control and structure than expression and aggression. To critics, it comes across as a coach overwhelmed by the challenge of managing a superstar who naturally plays at a completely different speed than the system being imposed around her. And that's where the bigger narrative takes shape. From my perspective, this relationship between Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark is heading toward a breaking point if there isn't a serious recalibration from the top. You cannot have a situation where a franchise player's competitive fire and on-court expression is repeatedly interpreted as resistance or defiance. When that dynamic starts to form, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads through the locker room, through rotations, and eventually into the identity of the entire team. The leaked sideline moments from the Seattle game only intensified that conversation, becoming a symbolic turning point for how fans interpret the internal tension. To supporters of Clark, it looked like a player reaching her limit, not of competition, but of restriction. At the core of it, the argument being made is simple. Caitlin Clark is not just playing basketball, she is shaping the entire economic and cultural direction of the franchise. And when a player has that kind of impact, every decision around her becomes magnified. Substitutions, pacing, offensive structure, and communication. Meanwhile, the front office, including leadership figures like Lynn Dunn and Kelly Krauskopf, is now facing growing pressure to evaluate whether the current system aligns with the reality of what this team has become. Critics argue that outdated slow-tempo motion principles and heavy micromanagement are creating friction with a roster built for speed, spacing, and creativity. If the rumors circulating online about internal discipline or attempts to rein in Clark's autonomy are even partially accurate, then the stakes become even higher, because at that point it stops being just a basketball disagreement and turns into a fundamental organizational conflict over direction and identity. And that's why this situation has escalated so quickly, because fans feel like they are watching a disconnect form in real time between a generational talent and the structure meant to support her. Now the conversation has fully spilled into the public space, and there's no putting it back. So the question becomes, is this simply growing pains between a coach and a superstar learning each other's limits? Or is it something deeper, where philosophy and talent are fundamentally out of sync? Either way, the debate is wide open, and the reaction from the basketball community is only getting louder.